Well, great, thanks for coming. I'm Andy Bakanowski, sit on the Energy Committee. I think I have the dubious honor of being the chair through attrition because it's just the sort of way things fell. Larry and Jim are two new members, and we have a fourth member. If you are interested in being on the committee, let me know. We can always use some help. And tonight's presentation from DOER/DEP, Jim Barry, who's over here, and Kelly Brown, who's with the Green Communities Division as well. I'm going to present some more or less on the new changes as well as sort of the program, how it's changed since we last went to town meeting on this. And if you want a little bit of history, this will be our fourth time going to town meeting. And if you've been a long time town member, how many times did we go for the fire station? How many times did we go for the vehicle policy, which still hasn't passed in terms of how we, well, actually we definitely had a good decision when we made the requirements of having fuel-efficient vehicles, but in terms of getting a replacement policy, it's now been going on 25 years, I think. So that could be a long haul. Anyways, I'll turn it over to Jim or Kelly. I'm sorry, Kelly first.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Do you want to answer questions if something comes up during it, or do you want to wait till questions at the end?
What do you think, Jim?
So, for my part, well, I'll get to it when I get about that. Let Kelly start.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe what we can do is I'll go through the first few slides. It's a little bit more programmatic, kind of 30,000 foot level on the program, and then I'm going to hand it off to Jim. That's going to go more into stretch codes. For my part, maybe at the end, there's a couple questions you can ask, and then I can hand it off to you. If that works.
Okay.
All
Okay.
right.
Thanks.
So, good evening. First, I just want to say thanks for having myself and Jim Barry here to speak about the Green Communities Designation and Grant Program in general, and then the specifics of the Stretch Energy Code. The Green Communities Program was launched back in 2010. The Green Communities Division came out of the Green Communities Act that was signed by our previous governor back in 2008. And what the Green Communities Designation Grant Program is it gives out grants of up to $20 million a year annually. And the funds from the Green Communities Designation and Grant Program come from RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and alternative compliance payments. So it's out of the state general funds. And the way that communities get access to these funds is they have to meet 5 specific criteria. The first 2 criteria go along with zoning. So that's adopting as-of-right siting through renewable energy or alternative energy. And you can do this through 3 different ways: through manufacturing, or through research and development, or through generation. So you don't have to do all 3, you just have to pick one of the 3 to qualify for criteria 1. Now, criteria 2 goes along with criteria 1. So for those sites that meet the as-of-right siting, so no special permit, but allowing site plan review, you would need to have expedited permitting. And that's a permitting process on the local level that allows someone to come in, submit an application, and get all the way through the permitting process within 12 months. Criteria 3 is to establish an energy reduction plan. This is 2 parts. The first part is to put together a baseline showing how much energy does Norfolk consume across municipal buildings, street and traffic lights, and vehicles. And then coming up with a plan to reduce the usage in town by 20% over a 5-year period. And the way to do that is through getting energy assessments of the different buildings. And so a lot of people ask, well, where do you get the funds from? A lot of people come through for the Designation Grant Program, once designated, to implement those projects that are identified in the energy reduction plan. Criteria 4 is to purchase only fuel-efficient vehicles. I feel like this is misleading. This language is straight out of the statute. Question we always get is, does that mean you have to have all electric vehicles? Not the case. It's really a policy that the Board of Selectmen would adopt, and it means that depending on the type of vehicle that's being purchased in town, making sure it fits the use of the vehicle. So there's mile per gallon ratings, depending on whether it's a compact vehicle, sport utility vehicle, minivan, small pickup truck, and so on. So it really depends on the use. And both the energy reduction plan and fuel efficient vehicle policy need to be adopted by the Board of Selectmen and the school superintendent. Criteria 5 is the stretch is to reduce, oh Jim, I'm stealing your thunder. It's to require all new construction to reduce life cycle costs. And the recommended way to do that is to adopt the Stretch Energy Code. And Jim is going to go into more detail on what that means a little bit later. Now, as far as designation grants and then competitive grants, the program's been around since 2010. We've had 10 rounds of grants, 10 rounds of designations for communities. We're up to 185 green communities. And the way that, once the community gets designated, we give a designation grant. And the grant is based on a formula. So it's a base amount of $125,000 and then additional funds based on per capita and the population of the community. So based on the population per capita for here, I ran the number on the formula and it would be looking at like an estimated $140,000 for this community. Now, once you become designated, you get that designation grant, but the towns have opportunities for future grants. We've had communities that have been green communities since back in 2010. What they do is they come in for what's called competitive grants. They're available on an annual basis. So once a community spent their designation grant, they can come in for up to $250,000 on an annual basis on the competitive side. Since 2010, we've awarded over $80 million in grant funds. To give some local examples of the communities around here that have benefited from the program, you have Holliston that was designated in 2015. They've already come in for 2 grants, totaling close to $400,000. You have Medfield, recently designated, coming in a designation grant of over just about $150,000. Medway has been in the program a really long time. They came in the second round back in 2010, and it's close to $600,000. And then Millis was also in the green community. Like I said, we have 185 green communities. We've had a lot of activity close to your town recently with Medfield and Millis. And then later in the presentation, Jim will show you an updated map of the communities that adopted the stretch code. And your neighbor actually adopted last week, which is Franklin. So now they're on the map as well. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Jim, who's going to go into some more details on criteria 5, which is the stretch energy code, which will be on your town meeting next month.
Thanks, Kelly. How y'all doing? Good. Did you get your tickets for whatever it is they were selling outside there? What the heck was that all about? A train ride? Haunted train ride. Yeah, my house is haunted enough, thank you very much. So I'm Jim Barry. I live in Belchertown, Massachusetts. Wow. Thank you for not laughing. I was a member of the Board of Selectmen in 2008 when the stretch code, when the Green Communities program was created. And I'd heard that if you apply for the Green Communities, if you jump through 5 hoops, you'd get money that you could spend on energy efficiency projects like heating systems in old schools. And so I volunteered as a selectman to go learn more about it. And the more I learned about it, I realized that Belchertown actually could probably become a green community. I could probably help my neighboring town, Granby and maybe Palmer. And the next thing I knew, the state hired me to go do this throughout Western Mass. So if you ever get involved with volunteering, I have to warn you, be careful what you volunteer for. So, as Kelly mentioned, there's 5 complete criteria, 5 hoops I like to say you have to jump through to get your fingers in a bucket of money. 4 are relatively straightforward. The 5th one, when I first heard about it, says making houses more energy efficient. At the time that it was first created, I had previously been on the planning board and we were doing 100 building permits a year. We were the fastest growing town in terms of population in the Commonwealth for 3 years in a row. And when the first time we had 100 building permits, I said, holy mackerel. And the second year I says, holy, where are we going to put the school? So we were pretty concerned about how things were growing. And I had a pretty good contact with builders in town because they all come before the planning board to get permitted. And I had an interesting relationship with many of the builders in town based on how well their plans were put together. And so when this first came out, I started talking to some of them, individually, and I said, so what is this, what do you guys know about this? Does this make any sense? So we had a meeting in town we sent a postcard to every builder who had pulled a building permit in the last 3 years, and it was a room like this full of builders, and I said, okay, so ask me 100 questions, because I know nothing about it, and we asked all the questions about what is a stretch code, what is it not, what does it entail, what do the builders have to do, what do they have to learn, do they have to buy equipment, what the? And then we got someone who's actually done stuff before to come in and answer a lot of these questions, which is how I came to the conclusion, this is not such a bad idea. So basically what it means is the law says we have to require that new construction lowers the life cycle costs of the new construction. And in order to require that, the first question is, well, how are you going to require the building you're building to be energy efficient? And it turns out upon investigation that the only way you can do it is through the building code, because there's a building inspector in the building code that says yes, you can proceed or not. There's no one else in town. The planning board can't do it, the board of selectmen can't do it, the health department can't do it. They each have their own individual pieces of stuff, but it's the building code that really is what regulates it. So, and as you may or may not know, the building codes change over time. So the building code that's in effect today is substantially different than what was in effect in 2012, which is different from what it was in 2009, which is different from what it was in 2006, etc. And as it changes in the most recent past, they become more and more energy efficient. Just as our cars have become more energy efficient, homes have become more energy efficient. So the stretch code in 2009 was a way for people to take option to vote, to choose to almost take the next version of the building code that we knew was coming down the pike and adapt it earlier, and thus make the new buildings more energy efficient than required, because you're really doing stuff that you didn't have to do, but you're going to end up doing eventually, because the code was going to be changing. So what we found out was, even though some towns wanted to have a different way of complying with Criteria 5, the language of the law that created the Green Communities Act didn't say the stretch code. It said you've got to be energy efficient. And this is one way we found out. Other towns have tried to come up with different ways to prove it, including Boston said, oh, no, we're not doing that. We've got our own ways of doing stuff. And they submitted a bunch of stuff, and we said, that's just all voluntary stuff. This doesn't meet the law. So eventually they also adopted the stretch code. So I'm going to talk a bit about some of the misconceptions that happened, especially early on when people weren't too familiar with what it was and what it was not. And try to answer some questions. So the question came up, can you interrupt me as we go? The answer to that is, you can interrupt me about this stuff anytime as I'm talking. Don't ask me about questions about cost yet, because I'm going to get there. So if you ask me a question that's coming later, I'm not going to say, hold that thought. But if there's a question about something I'm talking about right now, by all means, interrupt me, because both of us will forget in a half an hour that you had a question about this slide. So some of the misconceptions are, when it first came out, it was the first misconception I had, well, the stretch code, that must be new and experimental, something somebody just invented. And the answer is, no, actually not. It's based on the Energy Star for Homes program. I know none of you are old enough to remember back in the 70s when the first OPEC folks said, we're not going to sell gasoline to you anymore, and you can only buy gasoline on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday if your license plate ended in an odd number, and Tuesday and Thursday if it ended in an even number. I know none of you remember that, but I was around in those days, and it was pretty interesting how the country reacted to that whole thing. We should not be held hostage to oil deliveries from people who don't like us. So what can we do to reduce our oil usage? And a lot of programs were invented, including the Energy Star program, to try to reduce energy consumption and therefore reduce the energy we need. And the Energy Star for Homes has been around for a while. The program was invented. It's not new and experimental. And what surprised me as a selectman in a small town dealing with Boston on occasion was that the state adopted a program that used something that was in existence rather than invent a brand new one, which I thought was, interesting. So another misconception was that the stretch code would require tight and healthy homes, because the first thing you think about is, well, if I'm going to try to keep the heat in the house, I'm going to have to make it really airtight, and if I make it too tight, it's going to be unhealthy. And in fact, 20-some years ago, when they first worried about oil consumption, one of the first things people did is they put plastic underneath the sheetrock. That was a bad idea. That was a really bad idea. That led for moisture and mold, and didn't take long until people realized, oh, that's not a good idea. But in intervening years, building science has improved. We've had Tyvek was invented. We had other materials, building materials and building science to allow us to make these buildings fairly airtight and not unhealthy and not waterproof, not moisture resistant. So we have learned how to do it. So early on there was a concern that they're going to be tight and unhealthy, and the answer is no, they're not. They never were with the stretch code. 10 years prior to that, if people had tried it, it might have been, but today it's not a problem. Another concern was, well, homes with oil heat cannot meet the stretch code. And out where I come from, there's a lot of oil heat because there's no natural gas out there. A lot of people use oil, and there was a concern because to be energy efficient, a good part of energy efficiency in a building is the heating system. And oil boilers are not as energy efficient as natural gas, and so there was some concern, how am I going to make an energy efficient house with oil? The answer is, well, it's easy to do it with natural gas and or propane, but it's not impossible to do it with oil. It takes a bit more thought, and I'm going to show you what the thought processes are, because there's no one way to meet the stretch code. There's multiple ways to meet the stretch code, so we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Another concern that people had early on was that town residents would be required to update their homes and make them more energy efficient. And this again comes primarily from out where I live, where you may be familiar with Title V, which is if you have a septic system in your yard and you sell your house, you have to make sure that your septic system is up to the latest codes. And sometimes that costs money if you have an old building and an old house and you've got to update the septic system. So people thought, well, is the stretch code the same way? If I sell my house, am I going to have to insulate everything and change all the windows out? The answer is no. It's never been that way. That was a valid concern, a valid fear, but the stretch code has never said that when you sell your house, you have to update it to the latest. It's never been that way. In fact, the current stretch code, the new stretch code that went into effect on January 1 of 2017, applies only to new residential construction and new commercial construction. It does not explicitly exempts additions, renovations, and repairs. So the previous stretch code did talk about renovations and repairs, the new stretch code does not. Okay. In fact, what we now say, and as Kelly was mentioning earlier, we've been, the first years, 2 or 3 years we were doing this, quite a few towns said yes, quite a few towns said no thank you, I'm not interested. Some towns said yes, some towns said no, let's wait till somebody else tries it. Today we can say a stretch code is not much of a stretch. When it first started, it was, if you compared the stretch code in 2010, and it was being compared to the 2006 energy code, it was a bit of a stretch, but very shortly, the 2006 code became the 2009 code, so then in 2010, the 2010 stretch code and 2009 energy code, there was still a bit of a difference. The requirements for insulation was a lot stiffer. The requirements for quality of glass was stiffer. The requirements for air sealing and air testing was stiffer than the old one. Estimates were $5,000, $7,000 more to build a stretch code home than a non-stretch code home in 2010. It was a bit of a stretch. Now, we were able to show that if you did do so, if you did spend that money, you would get that money back because you're saving money on oil and electricity or whatever you're using. But still, some people said, you know what, we don't want to do that yet. In July of 2014, the base energy code changed again, and that was the code that they were looking towards when they were designing the stretch code, right? They were looking ahead to, see, these dates are all weird, right? So the IECC 2012 was adopted in 2014. What the heck does that mean? The IECC is the International Energy Code Commission, which they say international, but I think it's U.S. and Canada and one small other. It's not this huge international thing, but it is more than one country, so they call it the International Code. But throughout the country, the U.S., there's a meeting every 3 years, building experts, building supervisors, building manufacturers, and they talk about revising the energy part of the code every 3 years. And part of the 2008 Green Communities Act was Massachusetts will adopt the IECC code within a year of them adopting it. So in the 2009 code, we really took off in 2010. The 2012 code should have happened in 2013, but that was right around election time, and people are wondering, what are we going to do about the stretch code? Are we going to kill it? Are we going to make it worse? What are we going to... So it didn't really happen until July of 2014, but that was the code that really was a bit of a stretch from the old code, and the stretch code did not change when the standard code changed. Yeah, so you're doing, oh really? Because that's what everybody thought, is when the new code changes, then the stretch code will change again. Then the new code will change, and the stretch code will always stay quite a bit ahead of it. But they realized that the stretch code was already close to the 2012 code, and there was no real reason to make it crazier. And so, as of July 1 of 2014, buildings built in this town without the stretch code are very similar to homes built within the stretch code town in terms of insulation factors, window factors, air sealing. Those were all incorporated into the standard building code. So what we say is that base code caught up with the stretch code, and some builders were telling us that the stretch code was actually easier to comply with than that 2012 code. insulation examples. So the new code says you have to have R49 in the ceilings. That's a lot of insulation. The stretch code allows you to have lots of insulation in some places and not quite so much in other places, and you can trade off insulation for heating systems or better windows. But with the non-stretch code, you do what it says. It's prescriptive. You do exactly what the prescription says. I think I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. So with the stretch code, with the higher insulation factors in the 2012 code, and you have odd-shaped roofs, and sometimes it's hard to get R49 in all those places. So some builders decided that they would go to stretch code, which allowed them to not follow the exact letter of the law, because they could use the optional pieces of it instead. And in January 2017, both codes changed one more time. The standard building code changed and the stretch code was revised. The standard building code changed slightly to come almost completely in sync with the old stretch code in terms of processes, and the stretch code did not change. It did not get more stringent. It did not get more energy efficient. It requires, well, I'll get into what it does require. The basic difference between the stretch code and the non-stretch code is that you have to have an outside expert be involved in the process. A HERS rater, Home Energy Rating Services Energy Rater. What the heck is that guy? So the builder, if you're going to build a house, you have to get a plumbing subcontractor, and you have to get an electrical subcontractor, and you're going to get a concrete subcontractor. Now you also have to get an energy expert subcontractor. You have to hire someone who's going to help you look at the design of your building to see if it is in fact going to be energy efficient, and show up at the building a couple times while it's being built to make sure it is being done energy efficient, and show up at the tail end to make sure they certify it's energy efficient, and get a piece of paper to give to the building inspector, say, yes, this really is energy efficient. And yes, this new subcontractor needs money. You don't work for free. So the good news is you have an outside expert to help you design the building, make sure it's energy efficient, and to test it as it's being done, so that the consumer protection, the person who's going to end up owning a house is pretty sure that this is energy efficient. And the Mass Save rebate program covers an awful lot of that extra cost. We're going to talk about real numbers of real costs with some dollars and cents as we get further on in the program. And of course, the homeowner receives annual energy costs year after year after year after year after year. So again, the criteria 5 says the new buildings have to be energy efficient. The stretch code is the only way we know of to meet that criteria at this point. We're open to suggestions if someone has another idea. The process is similar to Energy Star for homes. Training has been done. Building officials have been trained on what the stretch code is and is not. The basic difference, though, is what I mentioned briefly earlier, is it provides for performance testing rather than prescriptive measures. What the heck does that mean? So you go to a doctor, you get a prescription, and you follow the prescription, take 2 aspirin, call me in the morning. The building code has a prescriptive path to compliance and a performance path to compliance. The prescriptive path says you do exactly what I tell you, but R19 in the walls for insulation, R39 in the ceilings. The building inspector comes up with his book and looks at it and says, yep, you got R19, I can read it right on the foil, check off. Yep, check. So you follow the prescription. The stretch code says, we're not going to make you follow the prescription. We're going to give you a whole list of things that you need to do to take into consideration to make the whole house energy efficient. We're going to look at the whole house holistically as a system and start gauging it to see if it in fact is energy efficient. And if it does meet those criteria, then you can go forward. So that's a performance path. We're going to measure the performance of the house rather than just a prescriptive path. And why would you want to do the prescriptive path? Why would you want to do performance path instead? Prescriptive codes don't guarantee good installation of the insulation. If you hired my son home from school to go and staple up the pink stuff in between the 2x4s, that may or may not be great. Now in 2012, they required that the insulation be done really well. The insulation has to touch all 6 sides, the outside wall, the inside wall, both sides, top and bottom. So you have to do a much better job of insulation today than you did in 2009, 2010. But still, you might want to measure the performance of how the house is done, not simply did you do what the book says you have to do. Small air gaps that can happen anywhere in the house if it's not done really well small air gaps can reduce the R value by 50% or more. So that's a reason why you might want to consider doing that. So the performance path, which is a holistic thing, requires following the HERS process, which is based on the Energy Star for Homes process. And we're going to talk about what is that? How's it start? How's it finish? Before you can go anywhere, before you can get a building permit, you have to find a HERS rater. You're going to find a ResNet HERS provider. You're going to find someone who's licensed and trained and certified to be a HERS rater. You're going to go to that person's office with the plans for the house you want to build, and he or she's going to say, okay, how many square feet is it? Well, it's 2,400 square feet. Is it one story or two story? It's two story. Does it face north, south? Actually, it faces south. What kind of overhangs do you have over the windows that might protect it from hot sun in the summer? Well, we're planning on 2-foot overhangs, actually. Well, what kind of heating? So they go through all of this information about the plan of the house, and the computer is comparing it to what the house would have been looked like under the old building code, the requirements under 2006. So 2006 said you need R19, you're going to use R49. The old computer said you have to use a certain kind of window. Well, we're going to use these kind of windows. And the computer is measuring one versus the other, and it starts comparing it and dropping this thermometer, this gauge. So we're going to start with a score of 100. That's a standard home built to 2006 building code. And everything you do under your new home to make it more efficient than that, it starts dropping this thermometer down. And you have to get to a certain place to get it there. So before you even build a house, before you get a building permit, you're going to know what stuff are you using in the house, how much stuff are you using in the house, how well are you going to build it, what equipment are you using. And then you get a piece of paper out of the computer and you go to the building inspector and says, I plan on building a house that has these components in it, and it's going to have a HERS score of 55, and he gives you a building permit to start. So you do this even before you start building. And while you're building a house, the HERS rater is going to actually come out and look at the insulation and the installation of the insulation before the sheetrock goes on, right? Because you don't want to get to the tail end of the whole thing and find out that, oh man, I didn't make it, right? So he's going to come out and look at it before the sheetrock goes on. He's going to come out a second time and look at the insulation, blower door test. So this is a blower door test. It's a final test. Notice the house is all painted. You don't want to fail this test, right? Because this is going to be hard to fix these. So early on, some of the builders, when they first start doing this, they'll have the person out there multiple times for advice and how am I doing? Does this look like I'm going to pass or not? What that gentleman's doing is they close the doors and the windows, they put this blower door device on the door, and they put pressure in the house, and they measure airflow per hour through that device to see how leaky it is. If there's a lot of stuff going through, there must be a lot of leak somewhere. So then you know it's too drafty, it's too airtight, it's not airtight enough, but I also know if it's too airtight, right? You don't want zero. So it's a good idea. So what the process is talk to the HERS inspector before the building permit, have the HERS inspector come out while it's being built, have the final inspection done, and another piece of paper comes out of the HERS computer to go back to the building inspector and says, you don't have to worry about this house being energy efficient. I certified it passed. The building inspector doesn't have any more work to do than they used to. Some building inspectors have chosen, at this point, have chosen to not even be involved with it, but many building inspectors early on say, I'm going to go there when the HERS rater's there and see what he's doing, see what's going on. Because I used to have to do that. I used to look at insulation and sheetrock and air sealing. So at this point, some building inspectors are more involved than others, but the short story is there's no extra work on the part of the building inspector. So that's the thermometer. It analyzes all sorts of things, the heating system, the cooling system, the hot water system, lighting and appliances. It is based on the 2006 building code. That was another question that people said. So in 2017, when they changed the stretch code and they changed the building code, did they change the thing you're measuring against? So no, they didn't. They kept the same 2006 as a standard home. So people who got a HERS score 3 or 4 years ago, that score is still valid. So when you go to sell your house, you can say, I've got a HERS 55, or I've got a HERS 65, or I've got a HERS 40. You can use that as a selling tool, similar to MPGs in a car. Right? It's an idea, it's a measurement of, and it's objective measurement from someone else of how well the house is doing from an energy viewpoint.
Excuse me. The current base code, does that require a blow test?
Yes. So actually, the 2014 code change, actually the 2012 code that took effect in 2014 required a blower door test. As of January 2017, the blower door test now must be done by someone certified for it, which is a HERS inspector. So even if you don't have a stretch code in your town now, any new house built in this town needs to have a HERS inspector involved in the process.
Are there a good number of these HERS
Yeah,
certified?
not in the beginning.
Right.
Yeah, that was another concern and a fear. You know, 2009, 2010, there were many around the country because the Energy Star for Homes was already available.
Right.
And there was many green builders out there already, and they were using these HERS raters. The first year that people started adopting the stretch code in order to get the money in the hands and the bucket of money of the green communities, there was a demand for them, and quite a few more HERS raters went to school and became HERS raters. So today we have far less problem than we had in the past. I can't tell you about your particular location. Out west where I am, there's in Pittsfield there's this group, and in Northampton there's another group, and they cover the area pretty well to the point where I used to hear from building inspectors at the coffee shop, it's hard to get a HERS inspector. I don't hear that anymore, but I don't know about locally, to be honest
Well, I
with
mean,
you.
we have a few towns around here who've gone through it, so there's probably somebody, a group somewhere close.
Yep. Did you?
Yeah, a question.
I thought you had answered her question for me, yeah.
I understand with the new stretch code, it's performance-based. You have to satisfy the HERS requirement, the 55, for new residential construction. In a non-stretch code town, you indicated, I thought I heard you say that you still have to have a HERS rater involved, and you still have to hit a HERS 55. I didn't think that was the case.
No, so I wasn't clear enough. In a non-stretch code environment, you still have to have some performance testing like the stretch code. For instance, you still have to have a blower door test done by a HERS rater, and you have to have a duct tightness test done by someone certified to do duct tightness test. I always have trouble with that. That's why you see me looking up in the sky and trying to make sure I get my lips all right. But there's no HERS score involved in a non-stretch code because the modeling piece, the computer comparison of this home versus the previous homes, that doesn't occur in a non-stretch code, so you don't get that HERS score.
So what's the point?
It's just reflecting.
What's the score point of?
What's the point of doing the testing if there's no, it's not.
Okay, so I'm sorry. So there's a minimum, let's see if I can do this, how I can do it for you. So the blower door test, the number that you get will indicate how far down this thing may drop, right? So if I get 3 air changes per hour, or 4 air changes per hour, or 2 air changes per hour, this point is going to change. The non-stretch code towns have to have a blower door test that gets 3 air changes per hour or better. It has nothing to do with the HERS score.
Okay.
The HERS score is an accumulation of a blower door test number, a duct test tightness number, a heating system efficiency rank number, a cooling system number. All those things taken together gives you a final HERS score, none of which happens, not all of which happens in the prescriptive world.
Yeah.
But some of the things that were required for the stretch code and were new and unusual in 2010 were rolled into the current code. So you do have to have the blower door test, you do have to duct tightness test. You don't have to compare your home to the old 2006 code home and get a relative, relationship number? What's you call it when you get one number compared to the other?
Oh, there's a score.
Relative number? Relative.
So basically, is that just reflecting that how close the two codes are getting? In other words,
Oh, yeah.
the base code is starting to have pieces of.
Yeah. In fact, some people say, well, why bother then if they're so good?
My next question was going to be, so where's this going? You know, into infinity? Like, how are they just going to get Is there always gonna be something that's
Yeah,
like,
I forgot to start with a disclaimer, so.
like how much more energy efficient?
I've only been working for a state for 8 years, so any question that starts with why, I probably can't answer.
Well, I mean, so,
Okay, so
in the
historically,
future, they're always gonna find ways to make things more efficient.
so let's think about historically what happened. When the stretch code first came out, they were looking towards that 2012 code, because the 2009 was basically in their back pocket.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of folks thought that, well, when the 2012 code comes in, then the stretch code will basically be the 2015 code. It didn't happen. And in fact, the 2015 code wasn't a huge step up. What they found was a lot of things that are required today in your town that's not the stretch code are pretty state of the art. And some of the next steps you would have to go to get that thermometer to drop even more. Now you're talking about maybe some things that are more expensive and maybe not.
Because the materials are changing more than just hiring a HERS.
Yeah.
Would it be fair to say that one of the differences between the current base code and the stretch code is that design piece with the HERS rater or HERS inspector,
Yep.
as well as the inspection?
Yes.
And it may not be quite as much, there may be
Equipment
more
and technique.
comparability with the blow test,
Yeah.
performance base, but the upfront and inspection would be different.
You're absolutely right. The biggest difference is the involvement of an expert in the design phase and in the inspections phase. Not so much, the insulation is probably not much different. The quality of the windows, the U factor of the windows is not, to get a stretch code, you probably have a slightly better window, but it'd be a lot better window than what it used to be in 2006. So yes, the equipment standards have kind of caught up. The techniques to do it have kind of caught up. Even some of the measurements. Now the blower torque test is required. And 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it wasn't required. So where's it going? Since this was done, I'm on camera, so I'm going to be real careful what I say. This is. I don't think it's going to go, personally, I don't think it's going to go a whole lot crazier. If you think of getting super energy efficient, it's crazy. So there are some things called passive houses that people make. Now's a good time as any to tell you that when my daughter and her husband finally moved out of my house, they moved into a house that was a stretch code house that's very energy efficient. When they moved in, they had no children. When they moved out, they had 2 children. That gives you an idea of how long it takes to build a super duper energy efficient house. 12-inch walls, full of insulation. So their score is, I don't know, down around 10 or 20 or something. So it's possible to build far more energy efficient, but the cost to go from here to there.
So right now, it's just the cost of having a HERS inspector.
Well, it's a little bit more. It's a little bit more because a standard building house, and I'm going to show you some real numbers, is a little bit above this. We'll get into some real examples of what they are. If I can stall that for just a couple minutes. A few words on commercial stretch code. It does affect residential buildings and commercial buildings. It only affects large commercial buildings over 100,000 square feet, or labs and supermarkets over 40,000 square feet. And additions, renovations, and repairs are exempt. We have not, from day one, heard anything from builders or developers who do commercial buildings screaming and howling, saying, this is really stupid, what are you doing to us? Because it's relatively easy for them to do energy efficiency stuff just by doing great lights, right? If you're doing a commercial office building and you replace the old normal lights with LED lights, that thermometer thing goes, meow, goes right down. So I don't usually complain about it. Oh, we get right to the cost slide already. I'm surprised myself. Okay, so I'm going to show you some slides of what it takes to build pros and before and after stretch code. So here's an example of a 2,550 square foot, 3-bedroom, single family home, heated with natural gas in the Worcester area. So I didn't want to take a Boston example. or Pittsfield's example, we took Worcester. So the target that we're aiming for with that thermometer is 55. This particular example was already at 66, so I'm looking at this upper right-hand corner. The example base is 66. So just building it to the non-stretch code with these elements, I'm going to show you in the next page, they got to 66 already, which is, that's a pretty good house. But they had to drop that thermometer. I'm going to show you in the next slide how they did it. Well, they had to drop the thermometer, and it cost them, this is a summary slide, it could have cost them an extra $2,600 to get there, but the utility rebates are like $1,600, so the net cost between what I paid and what somebody reimbursed me was about $1,000, which is a little bit more per the annual mortgage payment, but we're saving $200 a year in energy, so a positive cash flow right away. And let me show you where that $2,600 number came from. So I talked about windows and doors and heating and cooling. So here's the items that we're going to be messing with. Here's the standard home, and then here's what we had to do to the stretch code to get that number low enough. So, as I mentioned, the HERS rater. You know what I'm going to get for Christmas? I'm going to get myself one of them. You know how many times I've said that? And I've been doing this for 8 years. So, to get the HERS rating, we added $500 to the cost of construction. Somebody says, you can't get a HERS rater for $500. I said, no, you can't. But you're going to have to get the HERS rater to do those final inspections anyway, those blower door tests. You have to contract with someone who's going to show up anyway. So what you're really paying is an extra $500 for the preliminary modeling and the inspection sites. So I got $500 extra cost for HERS rater. The windows went from a 30-30 to a 27-30. What does that mean? It means slightly better quality glass and construction so that the U value is more energy efficient. Those better windows cost another $500. The heating system, this is one of the places where you have an opportunity to really reduce energy. Just started with a natural gas heating system that was 92% efficient, which is pretty good, but they've got a better one at 96% efficient, and that costs another $300. The cooling system is more energy efficient. That was another $400. One of the biggest changes is domestic hot water. I can't tell you how many times in August when I get my oil burner in the summer to come on just because I took a shower, I always start screaming at the universe. You know, why am I got this big thing in the cellar making heat just so I can have a hot shower? So they went to a tankless gas on-demand hot water system, much more efficient, but it costs a lot of money. So this, we're adding to the costs in order to drop that thermometer down, right? That's what we're doing. And I also did duct leakage to outside. So the duct work through the systems is being done, not just was it tested for tightness, duct tightness, we're checking for leakage to outside and doing a very thorough job of it. And it costs more than probably $200 just in labor to get that done, to get that thermometer done. So the whole cost to build this house to stretch code and get that number down to 55 was at $2,000. Excuse me, $2,600. That's where this number came from. And utility rebates, so anybody who has an investor-owned utility, which you folks do, right? So you're all eligible for mass save energy audits in your home. You've all done it, and you've done it every 3 years because it's no cost. Yeah, you can have it done every 3 years. You had one done 4 years ago, get another one. Have them come in and give you free LED lights. Have them give you more insulation. They'll pay up to 75% of extra insulation, up to $2,000. They also have a residential new home program whereby they help pay for the HERS rater, help pay for Energy Star appliances, help pay for some of these other items. So that's where this $1,600 came from. So again, it does cost more to build a stretch code home. It's about $1,000 over a lifespan of how long we build a house, 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. And we're going to be saving money every single year on energy. So it's a positive cash flow from year 1, and year 2, and year 3, and year 4, and year 5, and year 6. So I mentioned oil heat because some people still build with oil. It's more difficult to meet the stretch code with oil, primarily because of the heating system, and it costs more. it costs $4,000. And I'm going to show you the numbers on the next page. So we're at $2,000 net cost. What you're going to see here is the heating system again is the biggest difference is the third line down, the heating system. Standard oil burners that you go down to the local heating and plumbing store and buy a new oil burner for a new house, you get 83% oil, 83% efficient. That's not bad for an oil burner, but you know the standard natural gas was 93. This is only 83. And you really need to get a better efficiency to get that thermometer dropping to get better energy. And that was another $1,700. That's a big difference in cost here. Again, we had the $500 for HERS Raider, $500 for the windows, the cooling system, $400. They went to they used a heat pump, domestic hot water system in this particular case, and that was an extra $600 above what they would have done otherwise. And they checked duct leakage again, more money. So the whole total extra cost to build a oil heated house to meet the stretch code requirements versus a non-stretch code was at $4,000. Notice that the base example here was 70, the other one was like 60 something, so it started off as being not that good comparison to start with, so they had to bring that thermometer lower, that's why it cost more money. But again, if you look at the cost minus the rebates, you look what it's going to cost you extra on your monthly mortgage payment, your annual mortgage payment, an extra $200 a year for your mortgage, but you're saving $700 a year on your energy bill. That's a $500 cash flow positive year after year after year. And that number might go up if the price of oil goes up. Just saying it might go up. I don't know. This is how they calculate those incentives if anybody wants to do the math. I don't. The summary today is, so the take-home lesson, this one you want to get the shot of. The stretch code today is no longer much of a stretch because the base code caught up to it. You do need a HERS Raider's involvement, but the base code requires a HERS Raider also. The extra cost for the extra involvement is offset by the Mass Save Residential New Construction Program, which, by the way, the HERS Raider are very familiar with. They're going to help you get those rebates because that's how they get paid, right? So they know what these rebates are. They're going to help you with that. And additions, renovations, and repairs to existing residential homes are explicitly exempt. The previous stretch code said if you put an addition on, you have to follow the stretch code for the addition, not the whole house, but just the addition, and that meant that the insulation had to meet the 2009 requirements, and the windows had to be 2009 Energy Star windows, but those are passé now. So they just said, forget about it. We're not going to even talk about additions, renovations, repairs. We're just going to make new homes meet the new stretch code, which is primarily as HERS involvement, and the standard construction of a standard home for the addition is going to be pretty good anyway. It's going to be pretty good insulation, pretty good windows anyway. So why cause people anxiety? Now there's the map. It's 210. Last time I said it was 207, right? We got three in the last week, right?
Yeah,
I'm not sure. Honestly, I have no idea where you are in this map. Sorry. Over there somewhere?
We have a decent amount of orange on it. So Franklin voted last week, and then you guys have, Millis, Medfield, Medway, all right above you.
So when that one yellow was sticking out of it.
Yeah.
Oh, so the good news is
And then right below you, yeah.
many home builders.
Which, that's a lot of growth, that since you guys have voted on the stretch code back in 2000, what was the last vote, 2013?
I think so, yeah.
So before, when you guys voted last time, Medfield they voted it recently, Millis hadn't voted on it, and then Franklin last week. And then I think, is it Plainville also voted on it last year. So you guys have a lot of activity that's happened the last couple of years since you voted, which just goes to the point of what Jim's been saying of how the code's progressed. And because the base code's progressed and caught up to it, a lot of communities similar to you guys and the ones around it, Medfield voted a couple times, it was their third try when they got it through, have been able to kind of show that difference and also show that the base code is now incorporating the performance pieces of it, such as the blower door testing, duct testing.
What's going on with the cake?
That's not my region. But thankfully, it's not
After you turn the camera off, I'll tell you. When I turn the camera off, I'll tell you.
Yeah. They're working on it. They're working on it.
I got a question for both of you, I think. I think, Kelly, you put up a slide, or maybe the third or fourth slide in, and I thought, I may have misread it, but I thought it said that the stretch code applied to new residential construction
Over 3,000.
that was
Yep.
greater than 3,000
Yeah.
square feet.
So you're correct. So this has been something that we basically, I think since the beginning, has caused a little bit of confusion. So when I talked even about the fuel efficient vehicle policy, this exact language we're supposed to put up, it's from the statute. So when the Green Communities Act was voted on by the legislature and pushed through as how communities are going to get to become a green community, that was the exact language. But then they handed it off, and as Jim pointed out, we had to implement a program and have some way for them to meet criteria 5. So what happened is at the same time that we were rolling out the program back in 2009 and putting all the documents together, the Board of Building Regulations and Standards put out the appendix, which was, its real name was 120AA, but it was deemed the Stretch Energy Code because that's a lot better. And when they did that, it was a way for communities to actually meet criteria 5. So that's when we said, okay, this could be the recommended way to meet that criteria. But the stretch code, which was put out by the Board of Building Regulations and Standards, covers all new construction.
Not
So
just
the-
3,000 square.
And that's
They didn't include that.
So, yeah, because it wasn't a way for us to, like he said, that even Boston was trying to come up with a way, but it was voluntary. We need a way that would actually be able to be enforced and also follow, not having all these different towns with different codes out there.
So
So you-
DBRS didn't care about what the legislation
Yeah.
was. They were doing their own thing, and we latched onto their solution rather than trying to change their solution to match the legislation. They
So the
already
size
do.
of the residential home is irrelevant.
So two things, I think you asked me a little bit. So there's another piece I think you were reading about because you've done your homework. So there's this criteria 5 on the statute, and then there's the other thing where the version before this stretch code had a HERS rating of 65 and a HERS rating of 70. And that also was related to square footage. So I was explaining that so this was an earlier version of the stretch code. It's not what's in there now. It's not the one that doesn't require renovations and additions. But the first version that came out back in 2010 had a HERS rating of 65 if you were above 3,000 square feet and a HERS rating of 70 if you're below. So that's the other piece I think that you read about and why there's some different language out there on square footage. But the basic point is the actual stretch code applies to all new construction. And where we are now, all new residential or commercial over 100,000 square feet. And then on the residential side, they have to meet the HERS 55. Did that explain your?
Okay.
Regardless of
I'm
size,
gonna
on the
Yeah.
regurgitate back to you one thing. This has to be right.
No, it does too, because you
It's-
guys have voted a couple times. It's important.
It's not, the size of the residential new construction is not relevant.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
And the reason it could come up in a question from someone is because previously when you voted, there was a difference in HERS rating based on the square footage.
Yeah, right.
So that could be mixed up to a little bit of what the statute
Okay,
says.
thank you.
And
But we always put this up because that's what the law says. We don't want to accuse of
Yeah.
checking what the
We're
law
being
says.
transparent of what was actually in the statute, and then we try to explain. That's why we say the stretch code is the recommended way, because that's how we've chosen. And as Jim pointed out, we've always said that if a community can actually show us an enforceable way on the local level to do it differently, they have that option. But so far, we've had no one come in that way, and of the 185, they've all adopted the stretch code, and as you saw on the map, we have 210 now.
And is the HERS target rating of 55 the same regardless of square footage?
That was, I think that was an incorporation, I feel like, in the latest version that helped with builders, but I think builders liked one that the stretch code is no longer an appendix, it's in the code. So there's the performance of the prescriptive, but there's no separate appendix, and also that there's one HERS rating, and it means a little more simplistic. And I think some of those changes are also reflective of making it easier on the builders as well, incorporating it and working in different towns.
And what is the target for commercial?
It's 10% below ASHRAE and
Oh, that's right, okay.
it's not her. They have a different measurement standard.
Yeah, okay.
Do you have, is there documentation or some sort of materials that could be useful for developers to come up to speed on? I know that one of our other attempts there's been pushback on the developer side about this, the buildings being too tight. So it sounds like that's sort of something from the past that we need to now dispel to say, hey, the latest and greatest building techniques or, science or what have you, we're kind of over that hurdle, because I don't know, the pushback, if that was just the excuse used because this, developers don't want to do it, or what your feeling is about testing the waters with the developers.
So early on, there was some concern from developers about how airtight am I going to make it? How, do I have to have ventilation? I have to have required ventilation? If I can make it real tight, I now have to put ventilation in there. What the heck?
Right.
Well, the standard code that they've been following for the last 3 years in your town has required blower door tests and air changes per hour of only 3 air changes per hour. Has required ventilation, has required these things anyway, so they've had to get used to it anyway, whether they like it or not. And to point out, the reason I want to back this is, when I was comparing the standard home built with the current building code versus the changes that were made to make it meaningful to the stretch code, they made no changes in air infiltration. It was the same. They made no changes in eye-efficient lighting, the foundation insulation, the floor insulation, the walls insulation, the ceiling insulation. They didn't make any changes to that because the builders are already doing those and meeting those lower.
So in theory, we should not be getting that particular pushback of air tightness.
Because it has to do it anyway. Sorry?
Yeah, he's saying compared to the base code. So
Right.
he's saying to get to the 55 from what the prescriptive
Yeah.
route would be, they didn't have to
Do
change
anything
anything
more.
in
Yeah.
those areas because they're already tight.
And this
So-
was, I don't know how many years ago this was,
Right.
so again, I think
Yeah.
that he answered that.
And again, there was a lot of people saying, well, if we get that airtight, is there going to be a problem?
Right.
And in the 8 years we've been doing this,
And then there would have been added cost if they had to add in ventilation and whatnot. I think that was the
Yep,
second point.
absolutely.
The cost was a
absolutely.
much bigger increase because of that.
You're going to make me with a bathroom fan in there and run 24/7? How much electricity is that going to cost? What am I saving? So what are you doing to me?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not doing anything today because you've been doing that all this past summer and the summer before and the summer before to meet the current building code.
Right, yeah, okay.
So you said it's no longer, the citation to it is no longer the appendix, it's just in the statute, in the regs now?
No.
So I was speaking of the 5 criteria that's the
Okay.
statute. And then, and that specific language has never changed. If you go in the Green Communities Act, under the Green Communities program that they put forth, that 5 specific criteria is there. I was referring to, we had a previous conversation about the version before this version of the stretch code that was initially put out in 2009. And that was where this, do you want to take?
So the 2009 stretch code was 3 or 4 or 5 pages long of what you had to do that was different. The current stretch code says simply follow the performance path.
That's it.
That's all it says.
So the first version
It
was-
is, there is an appendix, it's called Appendix AA 150, you still have to adopt that. But all it says is for our used buildings, use section N1106 of 780 CMR 51 residential code. It doesn't tell you what to do for insulation, it doesn't tell you anything else. It says use a standard building code, but the performance path that's in the standard building
Okay,
code.
so it's integrated,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
And the first version of the stretch code, how many pages was that?
thank you,
7, 6, 7.
thank you.
That's another thing that people are annoyed with. What, I gotta look at 2 different building codes? If I'm in one town, I gotta follow one building code. If I'm in another town, I gotta follow the other building code? No, actually not. Now there's just one building code. If you're in a stretch code community, you must follow the performance path. If you're in another town, you have a choice of, as you always have had.
Yeah.
Builders always could have done this performance anyway, with or without the stretch code being required. And some builders did. So there's some green builders, and I've even heard that now there's green realtors that specialize in energy efficient homes. And regardless of where they work, regardless of what the local code is, they build energy efficient because that's what our kids are buying because they're smarter than us.
I mean, we've done a couple of recent presentations in some communities, and we could look at the numbers too. For this community, we work closely with the consultants that run the new construction program, and we find out that there's a lot of building going on in a lot of the communities looking to vote that are already taking advantage of the program. And if they're taking advantage of the program, they're working with a HERS rater already. So they're already voluntarily doing a lot of this stuff. It might not mean everybody, but they're, like Jim was saying, there's already a lot of activity going on, and people are already going that direction for different ways.
But some might think if it's required, then they lose one of their selling points.
They're no longer unique. Well, then I tell them, get the thermometer lower.
Yeah, I know.
Sell a hers 40. They'll blow somebody's socks off.
Yeah. That's just good.
Anything else? Any questions from home? Call in. Get your phone. Call these guys. Call these guys.
It's on Facebook Live.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.